Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Alumni Speaker Series, Leading Without a Title. My name is Jessica Wilson, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer here at Montfort University. This is actually the third event in our Alumni Speaker Series, a programme that connects our community with inspiring DMU graduates who share their expertise on professional development, career insights, and personal growth. The Alumni Speaker Series is led by the DMU for Life team, which is myself and also my manager, Danielle Wright, who is in the audience, who we are here to support alumni and graduates. Our aim is simple, to help DMU graduates stay connected with the university and with one another. We do that through the community events like this, our quarterly newsletter, and our online platform, the Alumni Hub, which I'm going to pop a link in the chat if you're not signed up, which brings together over 9,000 members worldwide. If you do enjoy tonight's session and would like to get more involved, there are plenty of ways to do so. We're looking for people to mentor students, speak at events, and provide case studies. So if you would like to know more, please email DMU for Life and express your interest, and we can go from there. You can also stay up to date with future events through our quarterly alumni newsletter. It's the best way to hear about upcoming sessions, opportunities, and ways to get involved with DMU. If you haven't heard from us in a while, please go to the Stay Connected at DMU website. And again, I'll pop that in the chat and the link to update your details with us. For housekeeping, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. You should be able to see that at the top of the screen so that Stephanie can read them at the end as she's sharing her screen. She may not be able to read them. We'll also be recording the session, as I mentioned, so please keep your microphones off. So don't be upset if I do just see that you can hear some noise and I might mute you. So for now, I'm going to hand you over to Stephanie, who has over 15 years experience leading teams across pharma, life sciences, healthcare, logistics, and Stephanie will share practical ways to grow your confidence, influence others, and create impact wherever you are in your career. Please welcome Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you to everyone who's joined this evening. It's nice to meet with you all. As Jessica said, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm limited with what I can see, so hopefully you can see me and hopefully you can hear me okay as well. The title of tonight's session is Leading Without a Title, which perhaps sounds a little bit sad. So hopefully we can expand on that and explain why it's not at all a kind of sad or less than optimum title for this presentation. And what I want to do through this presentation is really share with you my experiences of how I have developed my own leadership skills, how my leadership journey began and how that's evolved across the past several decades. And also hopefully show you that regardless of where you are in your career, regardless of the role that you have, and regardless of the path ahead of you, that anybody who wishes to lead and anybody who wishes to promote themselves as a leader is able to do that with a little bit of insight and hopefully with some of the tips and tricks that I'll share in this presentation. So if I can get this to move on, which already it's not doing, apologies. There we are. Just to start with a disclaimer, I just want to share that the content I'm sharing for this session is really intended for informational and educational purposes only. It might include some content or use links that are really only there just to stimulate discussion and thoughts, and that the views and opinions and information that's contained within this presentation are entirely my own, and they may not necessarily represent the opinions of De Montfort University or any other associated agency. So that's just the disclaimer in there to make sure that nobody can get offended or get confused. What we're going to cover tonight, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, hopefully to justify why I've been asked to present this session. We'll talk a little bit about what is leadership. We'll look at the different styles of leadership, and then hopefully that will lead you to ask, what kind of leader are you currently, and how can you evolve that into a different type or develop the characteristics that are complementary to leadership? How would you develop your own leadership style, and how can you demonstrate your leadership capabilities in whatever organisation you're currently working in? And how does that enable you to progress through your career or progress through different levels? And hopefully by the end of this evening, there won't be time to complete an action plan, but I will share with you a template which I've used and which should be helpful to you developing your own action plan. So as Jessica's already said, please make yourself comfortable. This is an hour of your life you'll never get back, so hopefully you'll get the maximum benefit from it. Please put your phones on silent. If you do have your phone with you, that's great, because there will be an opportunity throughout the presentation where we'll need to scan a QR code. And I welcome any kind of questions. I also welcome any kind of input, feedback, commentary as well. And the general kind of rule for this session is that all contributions are relevant and respected. So please don't be shy about sharing your own thoughts and feelings as well. But most importantly, please enjoy it. So let's start with a brief overview of who am I and why have I been asked to give this presentation. So I am 54, so I have more than 50 years of experience of living through various different scenarios. I've been working since I was 22. So that's about 30 years of work experience. And I've had what I consider quite an interesting career, lots of different twists and turns. The photograph on the top left-hand side of the screen is me as a 22-year-old. So my background is that I started my professional career as a dentist. I studied dentistry at Glasgow University. And I think when I was at university, I very quickly realised that I didn't really want to be a dentist. But by that point in time, it was a bit too late. Dentistry is not the kind of course that you start and then decide that you don't want to do it at the end of it. So after 5 years, I was kind of rapidly thinking, okay, how can I do this when I know it's something I don't want to do? So I was very lucky and applied for and was granted a cadetship within the armed forces. So when I finished university, I joined the British Army as a dental officer. And that photograph in the top left is where I had my first placement with the British Army, and that was out in Hong Kong, which was fantastic as a 22-year-old new graduate. I served 6 years in the British Army. I went in the rank of captain, and with that rank and role came the responsibility of leadership. And when I left the Army 6 years later, after the end of my short service commission, I retired as a major. And that in itself, again, brought additional leadership requirements. But I think what I have learned looking back is that the leadership style required in the military is very different to the leadership style that is generally acceptable in normal life and within corporate industry as well. So it's required a lot of learning and changing and evolving and developing over time as well. When I left the Army, I spent 13 unhappy years as a dentist within the NHS in Scotland. And again, because I think I knew deep down it wasn't really my true calling, I spent most of those 13 years in various posts which didn't necessarily involve treating patients all day. So I spent time as a postgraduate tutor in the NHS, and again was required to lead various postgraduate groups and postgraduate students. And then I also worked as a dental advisor with the NHS National Services Scotland, which again required leadership and involved kind of overseeing general dental practitioners and auditing their work as well, and was also involved in various fraud cases. When I decided that I'd had enough of dentistry, I left in 2013. I think it had got to the point where I realised that it was really pretty miserable and couldn't do it any longer. And this is where life started to get quite interesting. So I walked away from a fairly, well-paid job, and I went to work in a supermarket. And I worked on the tills with Waitrose, which I absolutely loved, but unfortunately it wasn't going to be something that was sustainable. So I had to find something else. And that's where I got my lucky break. I decided that I wanted to try and stick with something which was relevant to my clinical background, but I knew I didn't want to work within the NHS. And that's when I moved across into pharmaceuticals. I started as an entry-level project manager with a company called Catalent Pharma back in 2013. So it's been 12 years now. And from that entry-level project manager role in 2013, I have now managed to, for the past 5 years, I've been in a global director role with a Fortune 10 company in life sciences. So hopefully I've been doing something right, and the leadership which I've had to apply has been recognised, and it's led me to where I am today. So I'm certainly not an expert, but hopefully I can share some relevant tips which might and hopefully be helpful to you in your environment as well. Outside of work, again, I've had a fairly interesting life. I am mum to an amazing son and daughter. My son is 22 and has just finished university. My daughter is currently in second year studying law at Stirling University. I'm divorced, but have a partner who's an amazing Danish man who I met. So I spend 50% of my time in Edinburgh and 50% of my time in Copenhagen. Again, because of Brexit, it's not possible currently to be in Denmark all the time, but I'm working on that. I love to travel. I'm trying to learn Danish. I've been trying for the past 3 years and there's still a long way to go. May never get there, but it's fun and it keeps it interesting. And another kind of useless but interesting fact is that prior to lockdown, so the last time would be 2019, part of my midlife crisis was that I took up natural bodybuilding and I managed to compete at national level and do quite well. So that's to give you a rounded picture of who I am. Nothing extraordinary, pretty normal, but had an interesting life so far. And I think all my life experiences, both within work and out of work, have also helped contribute to that leadership pattern as well. So moving on to kind of what we want to cover today, the question is, what is leadership? And the message that I would like you to take away from this is that leadership is not just about being in charge, which is, I think, what we tend to associate leadership with when we're younger or perhaps newly starting out. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have the title, that you have the office, that you have the kudos that comes with a high rank, either in an organisation or the military. And it's about more than the paycheck as well. And it's having that understanding and insight into what true leadership is that helps you to be successful and be an effective leader as well. So that's the first misconception to kind of get rid of. Leadership is not just about being in charge. The other misconception and sort of confusion that we need to clear up as well is when we're talking about leadership, we're not talking about management. So leadership and management are two very different things. And I don't want to get into management in very much detail today because we're focusing on leadership. But to try and explain the difference in a very concise way, I want you to think of leadership as focusing on inspiring a compelling future and vision, influencing people, fostering change, while management is more transactional. It's more about ensuring that processes and tasks are completed effectively and efficiently. It's about maintaining order and overseeing resources in order to meet current goals. So leadership is about inspiration and management is more about transaction. So again, if we start to think more about what exactly is leadership, well, leadership in itself is such a huge subject that you could spend hours debating what exactly is leadership. And what I've tried to do here is really just thin that down and focus on some key kind of quotes from various different people, which really focus in on the most important aspects of leadership. So as we've talked about already, leadership is not just about you. It's not just about being in charge. It's really about looking at leading other people, leading teams. You may have heard about leaders and followers. And although that's a little bit arbitrary, it's that kind of scenario. When you're a manager, your followers need to do what you tell them to do. It's a transaction. Whereas when you're a leader, you want your followers to follow you and do what you're asking of them willingly, not because they have to, but because there's a certain amount of respect, admiration, and confidence in you. And that's really about motivating and inspiring people to be productive. So if we take a look at some of these quotes about what is leadership, the first one is from Peter Drucker, who's a well-known kind of consultant in leadership and management. His description is that leadership is about raising a person's productivity and stretching them to become more than they thought possible. So again, not about the leader, but more about the other person, the other team member, or the follower, and really trying to stretch that person to become more productive and aim higher. If we look at Stephen Covey, who is very well known in the world of leadership and has written many books and articles, Leadership is communicating to people their worth and potential in a way that it's so clear that they come to see it in themselves. So again, it's about inspiring and encouraging other people so that they can recognise their own ability and they are not afraid to try and elevate themselves and perform at a higher level. We look at perhaps a military input on this. So General Eisenhower from the US talks about leadership of the art of getting someone else to do something you want done, but because he or she wants to do it. So again, that inspiration, it's not kind of giving direct orders, it's not transactional, it's the encouragement and the empowerment of enabling other people to perform better or to perform more or to stretch themselves. Martin Luther King talks about leadership as the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And I think if you think about the people that you're surrounded with, either in your home life or in your working life or your student life, think about those people that you naturally gravitate to. Who are those people who you naturally tend to depend on or lean on in difficult times? And it's the people that can still perform and still manage to encourage and support other people in difficult times that tend to have more elevated leadership tendencies. JFK, obviously leader in himself, said that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. Bonaparte, that a leader is a dealer in hope. And all these elements kind of wrap up into what qualities are important in a leader. And then Bill Gates also says, as we look into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. So I think the message, again, from this slide and talking about what is leadership is, can anybody be a leader? Are you born as a leader? Or is it something that you can aspire to be and something that you can develop? And I think the takeaway here is that not everybody wants to be a leader. And that's perfectly okay. So different people and different personality types have different desires of what they are willing to put in and what they want to get out of life. Some people have no desire or wish to be a leader. To some people, it might be the absolutely worst imaginable scenario to be put in charge of leading other people, or to be put in the spotlight, to have to make decisions, to have to stand up and be held accountable. And that's absolutely fine. The worst combination and a recipe for disaster is to have somebody in a leadership role who does not want to be there, or who does not have the right personality traits and the right skill set to be an effective leader. So that's another consideration that we need to take into effect. Not everybody wants to be a leader, and not all people are born leaders. You hear that phrase of saying, oh, she or he is a born leader. And there's a certain element of that, but not everybody is born a leader. And even if you're born with specific personality traits, then you still need to develop that, and you need to develop the relevant experience. So leadership can be summed up as a combination of specific personality traits, and we'll see what those traits are later on, but also having the relevant experience, both in life and in work, to be able to develop what's relevant and what's needed. And effective leadership is a dynamic blend of personality traits and learned skills. It's something which should be considered as having room for continuous improvement and room for continuous professional development and personal development as well. It's lifelong learning, and there's always room to elevate that to the next level. And it's through all these different scenarios and experiences that add to make you a rounded leader. But it also has to be said and recognised that it's not just about having good experiences and easy experiences. Some of those previous quotes mentioned, it's about how you react, how you behave, and how others look to you in terms of challenges, in terms of emergency, and how you react to those more challenging situations as well. If you're the person that normally wants to run away and hide at the back of the room, again, no problem with that, but probably best not to position yourself in the position of leadership. So what I would like us to do is take a moment to think, when we're talking about, it's about personality traits as well as experience, what are some of the different personality traits associated with leadership? What are the qualities in a person that makes somebody more naturally prone to being a leader or being naturally prone to being viewed as a leader? So what I would like to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because you can see on the left of the screen here just the start of a word cloud. And this I would like to be interactive. If I can just stop for a moment and switch to a different screen. There is an interactive cloud where if you manage to scan the QR code here with your phone, which is just popping up here, if you scan the QR code on the left with your phone, that will take you to this interactive word cloud, and it will ask you to input 2 or 3 words which you associate as being important qualities in a leader. So if we can perhaps just take the next minute just to let people do that. You can do it as many times as you want. You can put in as many words as you think come to life. So either what do you think is important in a leader, or from leaders that you can think about, either in your work life or your home life, or perhaps world leaders. What is it about that person that makes them a good leader? And we can certainly see plenty of words popping up here. Great stuff. So some of the words that we've got coming through, as you can probably all see, we've got open and honest, approachable, charisma, sets examples, knowledgeable, understanding, inspiring, honest, and courageous. Integrity, confident. This is excellent. This is exactly the characteristics which you need in a leader. And again, if you think about the people in your own life, perhaps if you have people in leadership positions, who are the ones that you respect and have as your role models, it's very likely that they will exhibit most of the qualities which are captured on the screen. And conversely, if you think about people in your lives, whether in a work environment or outside of work, if they are in positions of authority or positions of leadership, but you don't feel that alignment with them, if you don't respect them, and if you do not value them in that leadership position, think about why. And there's a very good chance that the reasons why you don't have that same level of respect is that they probably do not exhibit all of the qualities which are here, or they're definitely lacking in at least one. And the ones which tend to be the most influential are things like having integrity, being honest, being confident, being empathetic, being a good communicator, being inspirational, and being respectful as well. So thank you for participating in this. I will stop sharing and we'll go back to the other screens. Hopefully we're back up and running. And get this to work again. Deciding to play up. There we go. So having considered what are the various qualities which are desirable in a leader, we also now want to think a little bit about different leadership styles, because not all leaders are equal. All leaders have a different approach, and the difference between leadership styles is very important because certain leadership styles are more relevant to certain situations and scenarios. And conversely, if you have a particular style of leadership which is inappropriate, it's a recipe for not a good path forward. And one of the examples I gave you earlier was when you think about, a military style of leadership, as we'll see in a moment, that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to perhaps a global corporate environment. So the first style of leadership which we want to consider is what's called autocratic leadership. And that's where you have centralised decision makers with the leader making choices unilaterally without input from team members. So it's one person calling the shots, regardless of what other people think, and no room for negotiation or discussion. So what I would like you to do is have a think about what kind of scenario requires that type of leadership. The next type of leadership is democratic leadership. So that's where the decision makers act as a group. It encourages participation and input from all the other team members as well, and promotes collaboration. So very different to the autocratic leadership, which is one centralised person calling the shots. Democratic leadership is where there's consultation between the team members. So again, can you think of an example where democratic leadership is evident? Transformational leadership focuses on inspiring and motivating followers to achieve their full potential, fostering an environment of growth and change. So this is more about encouraging blue sky thinking. It's more encouraging, thinking outside the box, taking risks, being groundbreaking. So again, can you think of an example where transformational leadership is evident in the modern day world? Transactional leadership, that centres more around having structured tasks and rewards, emphasising performance and compliance through clear expectations. So that, you may realise, centres a little bit more, perhaps leaning more towards management than leadership, but it's still classified as leadership. So again, can you think of an example in current life of a transactional type of leadership? Servant leadership is talking about prioritising the needs of the team and the organisation, and really focusing on promoting, elevating the others and elevating team members and fostering a really supportive environment. So again, just have a think, and where do you think this type of leadership is evident in modern world as well? And then we have charismatic leadership, which relies on the leader's personal charm and influence to inspire and motivate followers as well. So again, have a think. Can you think of an example of a charismatic leader or a situation where charismatic leadership is evident today? And then lastly, bureaucratic leadership. So this emphasises adherence to rules and regulations. It's often seen in structured or hierarchical organisations, and again, limited in relevance to where this works well. But again, can you think of an example in modern life where we have a bureaucratic type of organisation that does actually work? So just to run through these again and give some examples to marry up, and please feel free to type in the chat or the Q&A if you can think of other examples. There are more than one for each type. Autocratic, as we mentioned at the start, we're talking more about the military. So autocratic leadership might not sound particularly attractive, but there are certain scenarios where autocratic leadership is essential. The military is one example, because when you think about, conflict zones, when you think about high stress situations, it's very important that there is one clear leader. You certainly don't have time to sit and discuss as a group on the battlefield. What are we going to do next? What do you think? What do you think? Maybe we should consider this. Maybe we should consider that. There's just not the time or the place for that in that situation. That's one of the few situations where autocratic leadership is required, and autocratic leadership works well. However, where it doesn't work well is you don't tend to find that, well, you shouldn't tend to find that there are many autocratic leaders in perhaps multinational corporates. That's not going to work well. But within the military, within war situations, conflict situations, and emergency situations, even if it's out with the military, perhaps the emergency services as well, responding to an incident, autocratic leadership is absolutely fine and is required in those types of scenarios. Democratic leadership, if you look at the UK government, we may not agree with the parties, you may not agree with the policies, but we live in a democracy and this is how our government works. It's not about one person. We obviously have a leader for each party, but any decisions that are taken are made by the team that make up that party, and collaboration and input from team members and cross-party members as well is a really good example of where democratic type of leadership is essential and works. We think about transformational leadership. As I mentioned, that's more about kind of blue sky thinking, taking risks. You tend to find that more modern tech companies are good examples of where transformational leadership is encouraged. So if you think about Google, if you think about Apple, if you think about some of the IT gaming industry, transformational leadership is the big buzzword in there. Transactional leadership. So I struggled to think of a relevant example here, and perhaps my example is not the best, so I'm sure you can come up with other examples. If you think about a high school or secondary school teacher, that's maybe doing them a disservice because many teachers are, demonstrating great leadership qualities. But if you think about a high school maths teacher preparing you for an exam, there's a set syllabus to get through, there are set tasks that you need to get through. The emphasis is on you doing well and getting through that exam. And there are clear expectations that the output is you need to pass this exam. So that's more a kind of transactional leader. But again, you can probably think of some different examples, and it would be great to see some of those listed out. If we talk about servant leadership, to be honest, this is the type of leadership that I hope I have evolved into more than any of the others. And that's particularly relevant when you are line managing a group of people or a team. And that's where, again, leadership is not about just being in charge. It's really about elevating your team, empowering your team, really making sure that it's not just you gaining success, that you are prioritizing your team members, getting the recognition and getting the success as well. Charismatic leadership, relying on people's personal charm. So this one could be controversial depending on your views. I've got two examples here of where I think it's charisma at different ends of the spectrum. And again, it's irrelevant to what you think of these people's mandates or positions. But I think if you look at the recent kind of Donald Trump and King Charles scenario, where we were trying to, from the UK's perspective, really trying to turn on the charm and the charisma by having the king, extending that invitation for a state visit. And if you look at Donald Trump as well, again, you may not agree with his policies, you may disagree. I think he attempts to be charismatic. Whether it always works is controversial, but it's that kind of really turning on the charm, trying to wow and woo supporters. Bureaucratic leadership, I think a typical example in the UK of where we have bureaucratic leadership is within our National Health Service. It's very structured, it's very rigid, and having worked in the organisation, hopefully it has changed over the past 10 years, but there's very little flexibility. And you tend to find it in the public sector. HMRC would be another example where there's really not room to be transformational, to focus on being charismatic or servant leadership. It's really following that hierarchy and structure. And the picture here of various different world leaders, it's really kind of taking a moment to think, and perhaps this is not the best represented group, but of the characters in that picture, think about how they come across as leaders. And as individuals, what are the traits? What is their leadership style? We've got Zelensky there. Is he charismatic? Absolutely. Does that come across? What are the different qualities? Why do we tend to gravitate towards liking or finding leaders more relevant than others? And again, it's a combination of their leadership style and their personality traits as well. So what I would like us to do now is take a look at our own leadership style. And perhaps you're not yet sure what that is, or perhaps you think you know what kind of style you've got, but let's just explore that a little bit further. And as I've already mentioned, leadership and your leadership style is something that can be evolved and something that can develop over time as well. And what you're looking at on the screen here is my own kind of leadership journey. So if we go back to the picture on the left, this was me in 1996. It was when I was in the army. I was a very young army officer. I'd just come out of university. I had the rank of captain, and I was so desperate to make sure that I was going to be taken seriously. And it's a very recognisable life stage when you are either newly graduated or new into a role or an organisation. You have that really desire to make sure that you're taken seriously. You don't want to have imposter syndrome. You are really keen to exert your authority. You want to impress the leaders above you. But if I could turn back the clock, and if I knew then what I knew now about how to be an effective leader, I might have behaved slightly differently. Obviously, as we've already talked about, the military is a particular scenario. And the quote at the bottom there was about me. And this was actually lifted straight out of one of my annual reports, which was written by my commanding officer. And I'm not sure whether I should be proud or maybe a little bit shocked that even at the age of 23, being in the army, I was described as having a tendency to be forthright and outspoken. And I absolutely was. It was probably required in some ways. And the other piece which I'm going to throw in here, which many of you will agree with, some of you may not, is that when you are very much out of your comfort zone, you tend to compensate by leaning on one element of your personality. And for me, it was being very much out of my comfort zone, very much being desperate to exert my authority, desperate to show that I was officer material, I could lead, I could take charge of other people, but also the fact that I was a minority, being a woman and a female in a very male-dominated environment. And that, unfortunately, is something which is still a very common thing which we have to deal with today. So it's not necessarily about gender inequality, but if you feel that you are in a minority element of an organisation, you almost feel that you have to compensate and either try twice as hard or you tend to shrink away from putting yourselves in a position of leadership. And there's really no need for that. But again, it's about having the insight to recognise why you have that kind of behaviour and understanding how you can address it by developing a rounded leadership style as well. I've seen it also when I worked in one of my previous roles. We had a new graduate came in to our global organisation. She was very capable, but she was also very keen to exert her authority at an early age, and it didn't come across well because she had a tendency to almost default to autocratic leadership style. And rather than being consultative and, including people, consulting with people, she would say how she wanted things done. And that came across as being bossy and giving orders. So that might have worked in the military, but it certainly didn't work in that environment. And that's just something to be aware of, particularly when you are earlier on in your career or earlier on in a new role. Just be aware, have that level of insight. Am I trying to compensate for feeling uncomfortable or out of my depth? There's nothing wrong with feeling like that, but there are more effective ways of managing it. So that was me in 1996. If we fast forward to 2025, this pie chart on the right is what we call a DISC test or a DISC score. Some of you may be familiar with it already, but a DISC test is basically a personality test which assesses your personality over 4 main pillars. And those pillars are dominance, influence, compliance, and steadiness. And what you will see here is I still have quite a tendency to be dominant and exert dominance, but it's not 100%. It's modified by these other factors as well. And the way that the DISC test works is that if you have a value of more than 50% in any one of these areas, then that is seen as, really strong in that area. There's also a really good reliability rate with this test. It has a confidence rate of 0.89%, which means no matter how often you do it or how often you repeat it, it's pretty reliable. You may find that some of the areas change, but you tend to find that your top 2 areas don't really change that much. So I have done this test multiple times over recent years, and I have always been top in dominance and influence. The 2 that tend to change a little bit, depending on what kind of day you're having, are the more sensitive areas, which is about compliance and steadiness as well. So with the dominance part, that really measures how do you react to difficult scenarios, how and what are you prepared to do to overcome resistance. So it's basically a measure of your assertiveness. The influence is really a measure in some ways of your charisma. So how able are you to influence or charm other people, and how often are you able to use that to deal with obstacles? And then the steadiness is about how much are you kind of more passive, how much will you avoid having to be assertive, and how much will you willingly and voluntarily accept a need to fulfill a request. So that's the steadiness part. And then the compliance part, that's quite interesting because it's difficult to explain, but in different roles and different scenarios, there will be different compliance elements of your role. So, does it require certain traits to make sure that you comply with regulatory requirements? You don't really have a choice. So are you compliant? Do you generally do as you're told? But also it's seen as how fearful are you of kind of a superior force? So, how worried are you about your job security, for example? Does that mean that you've got more of a tendency to just agree to whatever's asked of you? Or is it because you're working in a role where, as I say, there's regulatory requirements and that there's no room for variance there, so that it's really important to be compliant. It also obviously tells you, how old you are, what your gender is, but it's a really interesting thing to do. And by doing this DISC test and seeing what percentage you fall into each of these categories, that allows you to have some insight into what kind of qualities and personality traits you have. If you are aspiring to be a leader, but you have very, very little dominance, then that's perhaps an element that you need to work on. If you're an aspiring leader, but you have zero influence, how do you develop your influencing and negotiating skills? If, for example, you are, 96% steadiness, then perhaps leadership is not for you because you don't have the personality trait currently to be able to be more assertive. But if you are an aspiring leader and you have a very, very high steadiness, and by very high, we're talking over 50%, over 70%, then that's, again, useful because with that level of insight, you can then address how do you become more assertive. So what we will do is I would like us to it takes about 10-15 minutes to do the DISC test. And here is the link to the website. So if you want to take a note of that link, it's just https://www.123test.com DISC personality test. You can access it on your phone if you're not on a laptop, or you can access it on a laptop. But if you would like to log into that, I will stop sharing the screen for just now. I will also copy that and put it in the chat, and we'll take 10-15 minutes. It's 18:45, so if we maybe come back at 18:55 just to have a look at that, but it will allow you to get your score. Thanks, Jessica. You don't have to put all your details in. You'll be able to go ahead and start it. At the end, before it prints out your report or downloads your report, you'll be asked for your name and various details, but it doesn't ask you for enough details to be able to contact you. So don't worry about that. It's literally just them gathering data for analytics, but you're not going to receive any communication from them at all. So I will put my camera off just now and put myself on mute, and I will come back on camera just in 10 minutes. Okay, so just conscious of time here, we may end up running over 5 minutes or so, but please don't rush to finish the disc test. You can finish it at any point in time. And as I say, you can view your report at the end and see what your results are. So I will carry on with the presentation just while you finish that off. So now that you've got your kind of DISC results and you have a look at the personality traits and your dominant traits and your less dominant traits, how do you manipulate that? How do you develop the areas that you want to focus on? Well, there's various ways that you can do it. The most important message here, though, is do not change who you are. You want to modify some of your traits and learn how to be able to apply them more effectively in a leadership environment. But it's really important that you stay authentic and that you stay true to yourself. You do not want to become a different person. We talked earlier on when we were talking about, what are the good traits for leaders to have? Integrity, honesty, transparency. So stay authentic to yourself. It's about having that insight and self-awareness to recognise that you have tendencies to be dominant in some areas and that you need to develop other areas as well. One good way of looking at how you can develop the areas which are perhaps weaker is look at the people that you look to for role models. Who do you admire? Who do you respect in those positions? And what is it about them? How do they approach certain situations? What are their tendencies? And if you see them with a more prominent element of perhaps an area that's weaker for you, study them and how do they develop that and how do they exhibit that as well. And then also look at how you can develop yourself through continuous personal and professional development as well. So how can you develop your own leadership in your own workplace or your own organisation? Well, some kind of tips here. The first thing to say is it's very difficult and very challenging to be in leadership mode all the time. We're all only human. So please don't think that you have to flick a switch and change overnight. As I say, it's not about changing as a person. It's about staying true to yourself, but having the recognition and the insight of your own areas for development and improvement. But how you can develop it and how you can demonstrate it in your own organisation, there are various ways that you can do this. One of them is make sure that you've got an always on mindset. Whenever you are in your workplace or your organisation, you need to be in professional mode the whole time. If you are an aspiring leader, if you are aspiring to either step up into a more senior role or be looked at by the leadership team as potential leadership material, you cannot afford to have any areas of slipping up. So that always on mindset is about always being professional and always being squeaky clean. You have to lead by example. You have to set the standards and show that your standards never slip, regardless of what's going on around you. We've already talked about having self-awareness and making sure that you can look for and find some development materials to help you address less strong elements. And there's some resources at the end of this which we'll share. One hugely valuable piece, which I have always participated in and I'm a really strong believer in, is mentorship. So find a mentor. And again, don't go for the easy option. We have a tendency to lean or gravitate towards people that we feel we have a lot in common with. Perhaps you recognise elements of yourself in them or they're incredibly approachable. But with a mentor, you really want to pick wisely because you want to be challenged and stretched by your mentor. And with that, when I think back to some of the mentors that I have had, some I have been able to choose myself, some have been chosen for me because many of my workplaces have had mentorship schemes, which has been fantastic. both as a mentee, so being mentored, but now also as a mentor and mentoring others. The best combination is if you find a mentor, so somebody who inspires you and who you respect, but perhaps you're not fully on the same wavelength. Perhaps you recognise that they have a different approach to various elements of either the role, the job, the company. So when I think about one of my most successful mentor matches was in a previous role where I worked more on the project side. I didn't really have good awareness of the more commercial side of the business. There was a very scary head of commercial who was based in the US, who I'd never met in person. But we'd had a few interactions and a few emails with a kind of bigger audience, including some of the leadership team in copy. And I knew that I wasn't on the same page as her. It was almost as if we had a problem with each other without having a problem with each other. It was just difficult. So when I was told that my mentor was going to be this lady, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not sure how this is going to work. But actually, it was brilliant because it forced me to think in a completely different way. I learned so much from her. I didn't choose my own, I didn't change my own outlook, but I took on board her vision and her views. And so you broaden your own scope rather than changing yourself completely. So I cannot emphasize how valuable mentoring is. If your organisation or your workplace doesn't already have a mentoring scheme, most people are highly flattered if you approach them and ask them to be a mentor. But I would say just be mindful of what you're asking them for. You're asking them to give up a period of time, so it needs to be manageable. For mentoring schemes in our own organisation, we tend to suggest just a once a month meeting, perhaps for 30 minutes. You can meet in person or you can meet remotely. You can either set agreement on what you're going to cover, or sometimes you just have, open conversations, and that's sometimes how you learn more. So that's something I would really encourage everybody to look at. Either participate in any existing mentoring schemes or have a think and look for a role model who you could approach and ask them if they would be prepared to mentor you. And most of the time people will say yes. But as I say, make sure you set those expectations that the time allocation works for them. Other ways in which you can develop your own leadership in your workplace: know your audience and know your superiors. Know what makes them thrive, know what makes them tick. It's really about understanding, and somebody had written in the comments earlier, it's about understanding, what's your environment and what are your audience. So if you know, for example, that some of your superiors are data-driven, it's just understanding that and making sure that when you're producing or presenting anything to them, then you're focused on the data rather than perhaps your own view of things. It's also, gaining knowledge. Become encyclopedic about your workplace or your organisation. It's that continuous personal and professional development. Have a thirst for knowledge and just learn as much as you can all the time. Get involved in as much as you can, if not for, getting the recognition for it, but just opening up the scope of opportunities for learning more about all areas of your workplace as well. And also prioritise excelling as a team player, because as we've talked about already, being a leader is not about being in charge. It's not about promoting your own development or your own advancement, but it's being able to fit in as well. And the leadership team in any organisation will look for potential leaders, but it's really important that those leaders are team players. So this is how you already demonstrate that you're a team player by doing it now. And how can you demonstrate your leadership capabilities? How can you get noticed for having that potential? Well, it's about doing everything we've already talked about. So having the self-awareness, having the insight to understand what elements of your personality perhaps need to be developed, perhaps to be more assertive, for example. But there are other steps that you can take in everyday life, in the workplace, daily business, to make sure that you can demonstrate your leadership capabilities and leadership potential as well. This is not comprehensive. There are other elements of it, but here are some top ones as well. So Always lead by example, whether that's volunteering. An example which I can think of is in a previous role, we, again, working in project management, I remember our department heads being completely overwhelmed with work. We had a different site which had shut down. Everybody their roles had been eliminated, and we had to take on this workload, and we were already maxed out. And I remember our department head calling 2 of us into his office who were senior project managers and just saying, I don't know how we're going to manage this. So, I was already maxed out, but without even thinking, I said, okay, well, we can divide this up between the 2 of us. So I'll take this, my colleague took the others, and, it's just doing what is the right thing. So always lead by example, and it's about having that integrity and being squeaky clean as well. Learn how to communicate effectively. Again, if you tend to shy away, then become more assertive. Perhaps you need to work on various elements of your communication skills. Perhaps you don't feel particularly confident having to stand up and give a presentation, or, standing up and presenting your point of view in meetings, but learn how you can develop that. Take initiative as well. A good tip I was once given is always try and think 2 steps ahead. So it's not enough to think 1 step ahead. If you are asked to prepare something for your line manager, perhaps, a presentation or a document, it's not enough just to go away and fulfill that brief and think, okay, I'm doing this because I'm giving it to X or Y. Think a step beyond that. What is your line manager going to do with that information? Why do they need it? Where's it going above him or her? And if you can understand that, then it means that you've taken the initiative to focus on the areas that he or she needs to focus on. And it's just showing that you've got that elevated level of knowledge and insight. Empower others. There is no threat to your progression by helping other people. And again, it really demonstrates that you're a team player. So if you can support somebody, if you can help them to succeed, then that doesn't just reflect well on them, it reflects well on you as well. And it's noticed by other people. So nobody likes the person who, is all about and only about progressing themselves, but throwing everybody else under the bus on the way. It's about acting as a team. It's about taking other people along with you. Always seek feedback. Don't just seek feedback from your superiors. Seek feedback from your peers, your colleagues. Seek feedback if you're in a line management position from the people that report to you as well. That 360-degree feedback is really important. And again, I have been through interviews. If I think about the current role I'm in, one of the questions I was asked at that interview, which was by 5 vice presidents, which was quite intimidating, was, you can demonstrate your successes, you can demonstrate what you've delivered, but what would your colleagues say about you? What would your direct reports say about you? So seek that feedback and have that level of insight as to how you are viewed 360 around the organisation. Stay adaptable and dynamic. It's never easy when there are challenges or when there's organisational change, but it's having an open mind and always being flexible and dynamic enough to embrace it, even if it's not something that you particularly agree with deep down. You need to park that inside, and what you need to show to your organisation is that you are along there, willing, dynamic and flexible and open to change. It's really important to network and collaborate. You never know where opportunities are going to come from. You never know who is connected to who else. And particularly in a larger organisation, word spreads around. So it's really beneficial to you to have as many allies and to have as strong a network as possible with lots of different input across lots of different fields. And that also helps you succeed, because as various incidents and scenarios come up, if you have that broad network within your organisation, there's always somebody you can go to. Even if they're not the right person, they will know who the right person is. So having a network and collaborating is better. Showing empathy as well. And this is very much about if you have to make a decision or you are asked to complete a task, it's understanding how does that impact other departments, other teams, other people as well. So we know that it's easier sometimes to get things done than it is for other things. Not everybody's on board, but it's about understanding why other people are not on board and being empathetic to that. So understand what impact it has on them, understand how you can perhaps mitigate some of that impact and how you can support and make it more bearable for them as well. But again, it's about demonstrating that you're aware that, you know, everybody is impacted differently and that you appreciate that. So to wrap up, what I would suggest is, obviously there's a lot to take into consideration and you can't cover it all in an hour, but what you want to do if you really want to progress your leadership and develop your leadership is make an action plan. And it's not just a case of, you know, what do I want to do? How am I going to do it? Let's set a date. And then we come to that date and we think, oh, haven't done it. It's understanding what is going to prevent you. What are the barriers that will prevent you from achieving what you want to achieve, and how are you going to do it? So you may come away from tonight thinking, okay, I really want to do, you know, a diploma in leadership and management. How am I going to achieve it? Well, I can go onto the DMU website and I can, you know, see what's available. But the reality, what's the barrier? Well, actually, you know, if I'm going to enroll in a course, there are course fees, perhaps I don't have the budget for those course fees. So the reality is that's not going to happen, you know, in the next few months. So it's understanding and actually writing down what that barrier is helps you to look for an alternative. So I would strongly encourage everybody to use this kind of template and perhaps just set an action plan with maybe 2 or 3 things. It could be, you know, I'm going to find a mentor. What are the barriers? Well, I know who I would like to be my mentor, but I don't know them. So how am I going to get around that? Well, I'll connect with them on LinkedIn. I'll send them an email. I'll approach them in person. If you write it down, it's more easier to implement as well. And then again, just kind of looking at some resources. It's not necessarily about having to pay to do further education. You can access a ton of resources which only cost you your time. There's plenty of reading. I've put 2 kind of good known ones at the top here. Probably most people have heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the other kind of life lesson which I have learned is when I graduated from university after 5 years at dental school, I left university naively thinking that what I had been taught was the only right way. So it was quite a shock to my system within the first few years of working to suddenly understand that there were various different ways to approach things and various different right answers. And that's the kind of caveat I would put here. It's not to say that I agree completely with everything Stephen Covey says. It's important to keep an open mind and have a rounded view and not just rely on one source as well. The Harvard Business Review websites and blogs are fantastic, and they are easily accessible and downloadable as well. And obviously we've got TED Talks. If you Google Simon Sinek TED Talks, you'll find various ones. Again, they're free to access. And another area where you might look is there are various online platforms where you can cover course content. Coursera is one of these. It's not that I am promoting Coursera, but having used it myself, it's something where you can sign up. There's multiple different courses which are affiliated through various universities and colleges and academic institutions globally. You can cover the content, but if you don't need to pay if you don't want to download the certificate at the end of it, but the learning experience is just the same. So have an open mind. There are multiple ways of developing yourself and multiple ways of accessing resources as well. So I appreciate that we are over time, but thank you all very much for listening. Thank you very much for your input. I'm not sure if there are any questions. But just to summarise, what I would like you to take away from this is anyone with the passion to lead can develop leadership skills and become an effective leader. Leadership is about more than the title, the paycheck and the office. And to leave you with a quote from one of the UK's most well-known leaders, Winston Churchill, success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it's the courage to continue that counts. So the most important thing is go out there, enjoy the opportunities that life presents you, have the insight and take a chance. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was really interesting, and I hope that it has helped a lot of people, inspired a lot of people, and given some practical and ideas to implement. I think we do have a few questions. I think what I might do, if that's okay with you, Stephanie, is just send them your way, just so that we can include them in the link, like include them with the mail out afterwards, which I'll probably send tomorrow, because I imagine people want to rewatch it or share feedback or explore and some of the links that you've sent further and explore, obviously, like the disc matrix and all of that, Covey. So for everybody in the audience, thank you very much for joining. Do keep an eye out for the next Alumni Speaker Series session. That will be taking place in January, and the details will be announced in the next alumni newsletter, which will be sent out in November. Thank you once again, Stephanie, for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.